Really, this is part two. It kind of follows on from part one, which is basically a video I made 6-7 years ago now, called The Occult Art of Law. And I kind of made it was a spontaneous thing. I did a lecture at Birkbeck University. I just put some visuals to that lecture, and I just put it out and forgot about it. I didn't monetize it or anything like that. And it went viral. If you just, put in any search engine, The Occult Art of Law, it'll come up. You can watch it on YouTube. You can watch it on Rumble. There's loads of people who put it up and they put it on their sites. And it was just basically a primer to kind of introduce, I guess more than anything else, the trap that we find ourselves in. And so what I'd like to do for the remainder of the talk is to hopefully remove the veil around the trap that we're all caught in. And the basic thing that's happened to us is a lot of this stuff is really hidden in plain sight. It's so crazy when you look at it, which is why you can't really see most of it. And so I've been doing quite a bit of research into language. So I'll just throw this out there to give you some idea. Language is our operating software. That's how we work. We think in words, don't we? Well, I do anyway, when I'm able to think. And the language that we have is a bit like Buffer Bill Gates' software, Windows. It's full of malware, malicious software in there. We don't know what the words mean. There's viral stuff in there. And each of these words has kind of been crafted to have a vibration. And if we don't know what the word means and we keep repeating it, then we're going to keep putting out that vibration. I was speaking to a gentleman earlier, and he was saying about being adult, as if this was, something to be proud of. But when you know the origins of the word and you go back to the Roman Church, you find out that the term adult is an abbreviation for adulterer, or to have adulterated. And it means when you get to the age of 21, when you're supposed to be a man or a woman, you've turned your back on the grantor of dominion. Grantor of dominion, G-O-D, God. And therefore you've committed adultery against your creator and abandoned that. And you've gone on to be an adult. So that's just one word. There are loads of words that when you break them down, they kind of have a phonetic similarity. If I say, for example, male, you might think of a man. You might think of a letter. You might think of some armour, some flexible armour, seeing as we're in this area of battle. But phonetically, it sounds the same. But what's really important in terms of language is the intention behind it. So you can use the wrong words, but if your intention is coming from the heart, then people maybe you'll be able to connect better. And that's really where I want to go with this. Because I've got some of you know, a clinical background, and I've kind of looked at the obstacles that we've had to overcome. And the last few years I was speaking to someone, they said, I saw you at a talk about like 3 years ago. And I just thought, God, that seems like a lifetime ago, really, in terms of what's happened from like the COVID thing and all the other stuff that's been going on. And I realised when I was sitting down here earlier, looking at the other speakers, even Phil, who I thought looked better in a schoolboy uniform with a Gibson SG, playing Whole Lot of Rosie, but that's just my stuff. But you've got so, but basically the thing is, it is about intention, and it is about how we're communicating. And I kind of looked at this problem that I have in myself. And I think this is the first thing. When we look outside, we kind of miss the real place where the work needs to be done. Because if we want to change what's outside there, we need to change what's inside us. And in order to do that, we need to give a good hard look at that. And that's kind of the last place most of us want to go. Not all of us, but most of us want to avoid that. We don't want to deal with this inside job. It's much easier to blame our predicament on something that's on the outside of us and try and find a solution that's on the outside of us. That's what we're programmed to do, rather than take a good long look at ourselves and where we've come from and what's happened and all that stuff. And a lot of the speakers that have spoken before, kind of for me, they had one thing in common. It was about reconnection, or about connection and reconnection. And because basically we've kind of been, there's been this policy in our lives where we've become disconnected. We've become disconnected from ourselves, we've become disconnected from each other, and we've become disconnected from nature. And there is kind of, if you like, a universal plug that we need to install in order for us to connect with those things. And it's something that's really overlooked. And that something is called empathy. Empathy is the thing that helps us connect. Empathy is absolutely key to our survival. I know a lot of people talk about, and my buddies Suk and Chad especially, they're both warrior guys. They like this kind of stuff, and they're very. Chad especially goes on about life is, it's about the predator and it's about survival and all this kind of stuff, which is typical from a masculine point of view. But I'll give you some illustrations of how empathy has actually changed things really quite massively, and that we actually owe possibly most of our survival of this species so far down to empathy. There was, I read about this woman archaeologist, and she was going through some old bones, sort of Stone Age bones, and she found this bone with a hip, and it was a bone of a woman that had a broken hip. Only this bone was incredible because it was quite a bad break, but it healed. And she figured out, well, how come it had healed, And the only way it could have healed is if some other people had said, look, don't worry, we'll look after you. We'll give you shelter. We'll feed you. We'll keep you warm. We'll keep the wild animals away from you. And you can stay still, and the hip will heal. And that's what happened. And the archaeologist said, well, that's when man became civilized. Whereas I kind of look at that and I say, that's empathy. Because empathy is the ability to basically put yourself in the situation of another. And this is what we're supposed to do. This is what gives us our unique abilities. We have a reflective action of consciousness, and that works in words. But with empathy, it can be really quite instant. You can gauge where someone's at really quite quickly and what their need is. So you would put yourself in another situation and maybe ask yourself, in terms of a reflective action of consciousness, sort of bypassing your heart and your instinct, what would I feel like if I was in that situation? And then you're like, well, could I manage that situation any better? Would I be able to deal with that anymore better than that individual is? I mean, I was on my way here, I was at London Bridge, and I saw this beggar. She wasn't begging, she just kind of had this sign around her, and she was coughing. And I saw almost instantly where she was, and I stopped her, and I gave her £4. And she was completely shocked because she didn't have to ask or go through the normal rigmarole. I kind of heard her cough, and I thought, she's not well. And I just felt that empathic thing, and I gave it to her, and she kind of was really shocked, and then I just turned around and walked because I needed to get the train. And that's kind of empathy in action. That's when it's based on your heart, because in order to have empathy, it has to be connected to your heart. And when you're connected to your heart, you kind of transcend the time thing a bit. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try and give you a bit of the quantum gig, which has been sort of touched upon, but I'm going to use it on another basis. So you all know about money, don't you? You all like money? You all spend most of your lives pursuing money? Okay? Yeah? Is that right? Well, a big science there, certainly. Okay, well, let's look at what money is. What money is defined as. you know, because you'll be surprised. Money is defined as weighted metal. That's what it's defined as in law, is weighted metal. That's what it is. A weighted metal is actually a three-dimensional reality. A three-dimensional reality means it's a fact. So you can measure the length, the breadth, the width, and the weight of it. There's another thing that goes with it, which is called the quality, which is known as sterling silver. But again, that's a kind of little detail if we're going to use our currency. So money it has to exist as a fact. And things that exist as a fact are basically, you can measure the length, breadth, width of it, and the weight of it. And of course, if you can do that, then it must exist in time, which is 4-dimension. So a 4-dimensional reality, that's what most of us live in. That's our bodies. You can measure the length, the breadth, the width of it, and unfortunately the weight as well. And you exist in time. And that time for that body is kind of finite, isn't it? Okay, and that's a fact. These are facts. Facts exist in law. Law deals with facts. Facts basically are, you know, you're born, that's a fact. You're pregnant, that's another fact. And you're going to die, or your body's going to die, and that's another fact. So it's a fact, and that's what stands as law. And law is that you go through the various stages of development, and you mature into being a man or a woman. And let's look at that term, man. Biblically, which is where we get most of our words and stuff from, is basically the image of the Creator, which is basically the grantor of dominion, G-O-D, God, manifest. That's where the man bit comes from. So it's not male or female. If you want to make it female, you put a womb in front of it. In other words, it's a man with a womb. So these are the roots of where the words come from, their vibration, their musical thing as well, because also I'm speaking to you in a term of music. If I was to speak to you without that, I'd be talking like this regularly, like this, with a bit of a robot. There'd be no music in it. There'd be no up and down, there'd be no change in volume or everything. So music, again, is an integral part of this. And one of the talkers talked earlier about the seventh thing, you know, the 7 colours of the rainbow. Well, speaking as a bard, and being a musician is part of that. If you basically look at the rainbow, I look at it, I say, well, there are 7 identifiable colours, but there's an overlap on each one of those colours. And if I add that up, that gives me one more, which makes it an octave. We have 20 hearing, 20 kilohertz, 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. We have 20 vision. And if we're looking at vibrational frequency, we can look it down as a keyboard. We've got the lower vibrational stuff down here, the left-hand path. And we've got the higher vibrational stuff here, the right-hand path. Okay, and where we are, in our bodies at least, we are almost deaf, dumb and blind. With maybe a couple of little notes around middle C, C sharp, perhaps, you know, or B. That's about where we are in terms of being able to sense what's going on around us, which is such a tiny part of the frequencies that are available. Well, as I said before, we can measure our bodies, you know, our 4-dimensional aspects, but there's one thing we can't really measure, and that's our consciousness. We can't measure the length, breadth, width, and weight of our consciousness. And does that exist in time? Is that held back in time? And does that die? So basically, that's the question. It's the quality of our consciousness that is what really counts. And again, this is where law is. Because law, when people started writing stuff down, that's when all things went crazy. You know, most of our history is based on what is written down. We look at this as being outside of us, and we think, well, that must be what it is. We don't think about going inside, because if you look at the most basic thing in law, And it's really simple, really, really simple. It is empathy. Empathy is to do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. If you're going to do something to someone else that you don't want done to you, then you're breaking the law. It's not rocket science, it's that simple. It really is that simple. And if somebody has done something, or there's some kind of controversy, what's the best thing to do? Some of you astrologers out there might like this. You get 12 people together. I mean, the old mucker, John Harris, we thought there was probably 13, and then we found out that there was originally 13 signs in the zodiac. But if you get 12 different personalities, and they exercise their empathy on the issue, in other words, they say, I'll put myself in that person's position. I use the word person advisedly, but you know what I mean. That man or woman's position. And I'll feel what it is like to be them. That's the process in law. The jury is the judges. They are the judges. The judge or druid is just a wise man, someone who's right. We didn't even have that letter J, by the way, until after 1611, after the King James Bible. So there was no J sound in that sense unless it had a G to it, as in Geo, but I'll go off onto a whole thing about that in terms of language. So you exercise your empathy. So let's say, for example, a woman poisons her husband to death. Well, of course she's going to poison him to death because he's physically strong, much stronger. So that's the best way to do it. Is, can we get you dinner, darling? Bastards. Okay, well, you know, let's look at the difference between masculine and feminine, the passive thing there. And so you've got maybe 6 women and 6 men of your peers, right? People like you. So they can easily put themselves into your situation, and they hear the woman talk about what's going on, and the guy turns out to be a complete so-and-so. He used to batter her, rape her, all kinds of stuff, horrible stuff. And the other members of the jury kind of sit around there and go, oh my God, if I was in a situation, I'd have done him earlier. And that's law, and that's justice. So they go, not guilty. That gets a not guilty. You've got to live with what you did. You poisoned him. But that's a not guilty. That's law. That's a living thing for men and women based on facts. Totally. Foundation is based on empathy. None of it is written down. You don't have to write that stuff down. Why? Because it is part of the, magic word now, constitution of man and woman. It's inside you. It's an inside job. That's the only constitution that counts. All right, so some guys come along and they write it down and they call it the Magna Carta, and they try and spin it out and call it, you know, oh, this is our constitution, it's outside of us. They've already lost the plot. And you can break it down in terms of the words that they use. They've lost the plot. Let's look at the difference between law and legal. Legal, 1848 edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, defines the word legal as the undoing of God's law. The undoing of God's law. Why on earth would you have anything to do with legal? And I'll tell you one thing, look through what they call a law dictionary, because there's a deception going on here, because it should be called a legal dictionary, and try and find the word empathy. The nearest you'll get to it is emperor. It doesn't exist in legal, because legal and law are entirely different things, and they're manifestations of us, the different choices that we make inside. We can either choose empathy, and it's an inside job, and we need empathy to connect with each other, and we need empathy to connect with nature, and we need empathy to connect with ourselves, to stop beating ourselves up, to be empathic towards ourselves. You can't love without empathy. You just can't do it. So this is an integral part of who we are. And there's been a concerted effort for millennia to shut down our capacity to empathize and for empathy. You know, especially with the masculine thing, the whole thing is shut. Shut up or I'll give you something to cry for. Shut down that masculine thing. Don't cry, don't do this. Sit on this, or the whole thing. Those of you who are blessed with 2 children, I am, a daughter and a son. Initially, as they were growing up, my son was far more sensitive than my daughter. What? He was, and he's still got this thing about him, which was, I'd be sitting there telling him a bedtime story, and he's in tears. And there's a clue there. There's a clue there. Because, as I said before, we have this operating software called language. And that has been used to catch us in a trap. And to write stuff down again, that's been used to catch us in a trap. People say just because stuff is written down, it has some meaning. It's just lines on a piece of paper. It's just lines on a piece of paper. What your belief is about it is one thing, but it's just lines on a piece of paper. You can read it. It doesn't exist. It's not there as a real living thing. It's dead until you animate it and give it life by reading it. Otherwise, it's just dead. Some of you want to deal with your utility bills and stuff like that. Come and see me afterwards. You want to open the envelope up and let the spell out and have the mood and mind-altering thing that it causes you, the angst, the desire, all that stuff. It's just an offer. And you've bought into it because you've been programmed to. All this time, you are, people go, oh, what about the ancient Sumerian now with the cuneiform language and all the other stuff? What I see is a people farm. It's a people farm. You're being farmed, you're being harvested, and if you're doing anything under the grant of dominion, you cannot use law. So you have to come up with a whole other set of rules. Otherwise you can't run the people farm. And that's where legal comes in. Legal is the rules and terms and conditions on the people farm. And you're on the people farm. You've been caught on the people farm. How have they caught you? And this goes back, this is some mind-blowing stuff that I came up with in terms of the research. It goes back to a guy, some of you, I'm sure all of you would have heard of, but you've got no idea how significant this guy is. Okay? He was the illegitimate son of Queen Elizabeth I. His name was Francis Bacon. Okay? And Francis Bacon was I believe the second or the other editor of the King James 1611 Bible. Right? This is a bright guy, a really bright guy. Okay, he's got a bloodline, right? The Tudor thing, and he goes on and he allows the Stuart thing to go on. He sort of moves into the shadows. Okay, so this guy, Francis Bacon, he's responsible for a lot of things, which I'll go into. But before I do, and I go through his situation, I'm just going to kind of sketch in a simple background in terms of the shrinky stuff. I'm not going to use the big psychological words and all the rest of it. What seems to have happened to man is at some point there was some genetic quirk, shall we say, that created a thing called psychopathy. Now we can see some sort of evidence in this in terms of biblical writings or certain the cuneiform stuff, but this psychopathy would seem to have created in some writings men of renown. Make of that what you will. But the thing is with psychopaths and psychopathy is they have no empathy. There's no empathy. It's not that they can't feel, they don't want to feel or anything like that. They're not wired that way, they can't feel. And there's a genetic component to psychopathy. There's a loose rule of the thumb, which I'll give to you now in terms of a lay description, but the lay description is all psychopaths are narcissists, but not all narcissists are psychopaths. Psychopaths are born, but narcissists, they're created as sociopaths are, they're created by trauma in the infantile stage of their life. All right, so it's about having more comprehension to these, what they call cluster B pathologies. If you look at the DSM-5, there's a section in there that says about cluster B pathologies that includes psychopaths, narcissists, and sociopaths, because they all have one thing in common: no empathy. Okay, so you've only got to put in a few psychopaths in the mix, and they'll happily create the trauma, the wars and the trauma that are going to create the narcissists and the sociopaths. And if you're a bloodline family and you want the control and you want to dominate, because that's what all this is about, control and domination, and you kind of interbreed and just by chance you don't happen to give birth to a psychopath, doesn't matter. You just traumatize the crap out of them and they'll turn into a narcissist or a sociopath. Create some kind of rituals where these youngsters, that see murders, sacrifices and stuff like that, making any sense psychologically, and then you create them. And now you've got your foot soldiers. Why have you got the foot soldiers? Well, because these guys don't have empathy. The other downside of it is they can't connect with their authentic self. Now the jury's out on whether psychopaths have an authentic self. Because if you can't have empathy, then you can't love. And if you can't love, the question mark is, and my jury's still out on this, do you or do not have a soul or connection to a higher self? But certainly, once upon a time, the narcissists did. But because of the trauma, and the main trauma in an infantile state of mind is the fear of abandonment. Abandonment. That's the thing. Well, you just think what happens in wars. I mean, I look back at this, and both my mum and dad, they were babies during the Second World War. And guess what? Their parents were during the First World War. Look at the amount of trauma. It's the most consistent thing mankind's had to endure in the his story. It's always been trauma. It's always been incredibly productive at creating that cluster B pathology of sociopaths and narcissistic personality disorder. And the great thing about narcissistic personality disorder is the way that it works. It's because if you shut down your authentic self, then that reflective action of consciousness I was talking about becomes your true self. You've got nothing left. And it's that reflection, that's why it gets the term narcissism. Who was a narcissist was obsessed by his reflection. And of course, you know, your narcissists are obsessed by their reflection. But of course, their reflection is an illusion. It's a reflection. It's not the authentic self. And so over history, if you can traumatize people, so much so, and of course if you have a narcissistic mother, there's a good chance you're either going to be the golden boy narcissist or she's going to reject you as the daughter. Either way, that whole number of abandonment's going to come in, one way or another. And this is what the problem, one of the problems that's been overlooked for so long, and is still overlooked now. Because the manifestation, or the externalization of the quality of consciousness of a psychopath, a narcissist, or a sociopath is what we're having to deal with now. The whole creation of the legal system, I would suggest, is the product of that quality of consciousness that has no empathy. And in order for the legal system to work, and knowing that your language is your operating software, then you need to be able to find a way to introduce the malware words. The malware words that are going to trap you. Okay, and now we'll go back to Francis Bacon, illegitimate son of Queen Elizabeth I, abandoned by his mother. Okay, and he was raised, his main tutor was a guy called Dr. John Dee. Anybody heard of Dr. John Dee? I mean, the polite thing to call him would be an astrologer. but we're talking a black magician, because all this stuff is black magic. Black magic is about control and domination. That's it. And so that's what the driving force behind a lot of this is. And so if you want to introduce 20,000 words, new words into the English language to an illiterate population, what's the best way to do it? Now, he was a member, Francis Bacon, of a society called the Pallas Athena. Okay, and she was sometimes known as, well, I'll get to that later, I'll just come it through. If I was on one side of a valley and you were on the other side of the valley, and I wanted to demonstrate to you my malicious intent, I wanted to give you notice that I was going to do something that you weren't going to like, that my intentions were malicious, then the easiest way I could do that would transcend any form of language, would be I'd pick my spear up and I'd shake it at you. That would be me being able to say to you, what I'm about to do has malicious intent. All right? Shake my spear. Shakespeare. And how I wanted, if I wanted to catch you, I'd catch you in the same way that someone with narcissistic personality does. I'd target your empathy. So, especially if I tied myself up with the Roman cult and they'd gone through Ireland and wiped out the bards, but they'd meticulously written down all the stories, and especially if I was skilled at editing, which, I mean, I've just done the King James 11 Bible, I can edit that up. I can then introduce these words, because I can do it in a way, these mal words and these other words as well, because I only want a few malicious words in there, in the software, because the software is still going to work, it's still got to be able to be operated. How can I do that to an illiterate population? If I'm a black magician, all right, a black magic magician, a sorcerer, a black sorcerer, then I'd need to make a wand, and I'd make that wand out of the wood of the holly tree. I'd use Hollywood. Okay? And if I was going to cast spells on you, what do you call a group of actors? What do you call a group of actors? What are they called in a play? They're called the cast, aren't they? Okay, so I need to catch you because you've got empathy. And so, just like with my kids, I'm telling them a bedtime story, I need to reel you in because I can use that empathy and you create this stuff as being real. And what's more, I don't have to explain to you what the words mean because you'll see what they mean because they're being acted out in front of you. And even when you go away, you can then use those words because you know what they mean because you've seen them acted in front of you. You're still illiterate, you don't know about that. But these old stories that the bards used to tell, they've all been rejiggered and edited, and now those words have been introduced by Francis Bacon. I'm just suggesting, it's just my opinion, take it or leave it. Because what happened before that, if we go back to 1381, the descendants of William the Bastard that came over here had a bit of a problem on their hands. It was called the Peasants' Rebellion. And one of the problems they had, they couldn't get their heads around, was how was it possible for so many of these peasants, illiterate peasants, to be able to organize themselves and to name names and become a very serious threat to their domination and control? Well, I'm suggesting that the answer to that question is empathy. They empathized with each other. They knew what was going on. They empathized with nature. They had to, in order to get the harvest in. I mean, we've been looking at the guys working in the fields. These days, I mean, I'm flying above them, 1,500 feet. 3 or 4 guys, combine harvester, couple of tractors, one taking in the grain, the others baling the straw. That's it. It takes 3 guys. In 1381, it took the whole community, all of them. And it was an event that brought everybody together. And they were able to reconcile their differences because they knew how to manage land. And they had land to manage. It was called common land. And they were able to use common law in order to manage that common land. That was the law. How did it work? Empathy. That empathy with nature, that empathy with each other. But we don't know that now because we read these books. It comes off the page. And we've lost so much of our capacity to empathize with each other, because if we had empathy, we can connect with each other far better now. It's the universal plug. And connect with ourselves and connect with nature. Empathy is a thing that we've had all along. And that's what these lower vibrational qualities of consciousness have been targeting consistently over millennia to shut our capacity for empathy now. Completely shut it down. You look at those phones now. I'm looking at kids these days. Who they really are exists on a phone, in a cage, in a little box. Their whole lives are around that. Hollywood, the casting the spells, all those things, the image thing, look at me, selfies, all that kind of stuff. Because the quality of consciousness that's created that has no empathy. It has to externalize things because it's an outside job. And that it only sort of says that the solutions to any of the problems you have is an outside job you have to buy. So let's look at what you buy it with and how you've been caught. As I said, money is weighted metal. It's 3-4 dimensional, just like your body. Measure the length, breadth, width of it, and the weight of it. It exists as a fact, and it existed in time. That's not what you have now. We don't have money now. The sorcerers have done a very clever trick, very magical trick. They've basically taken away the fact of money and left it with an illusion. It kind of happened at the turn of the last century. The last proper pound we had was called a Bradbury pound. And it had 2 lines through it. 2 lines in maths means equal to. Those 2 lines were equal to, £10. You take that £10 note in, you go to the bank, give him £10 worth of sterling silver. Right, oh, sir, there it is. You can carry out your £10 worth of silver. When the First World War started, that's what people were doing. And the bank said, oh no, we're losing all our assets, because for them to lose £1 meant they lost the capacity to lend £10 at interest. So they're losing £10 potential currency to the £1 you've drawn out. So they had to put a stop at it. And that's where Bradbury came in and said, well, we'll just print this money against, the goodwill of the people, which is what Abraham Lincoln did. When the bankers decided they weren't going to lend, well, they did say, we'll lend you money, Abe, but it's at 25% interest. And Abe went to his treasurer and said, well, what can you do? He said, just lend, greenbacks. Print the money with the goodwill of the people. They'll back the currency. That's what it was. And of course, that's what one of the Kennedys wanted to do, was to bring the greenback in, which is why it got taken out. And that also gave birth to another, if you question that story, that also gave birth to the phrase conspiracy theorist. Because if you question the Kennedy assassination, then you're a conspiracy theorist. That's where it came up. The CIA did that. And of course the CIA comes from the SOE, Special Operations Executive, which goes back to MI5 and MI6, which guess what? Goes all the way back to Dr. John Dee, who tutored Francis Bacon. And Dr. John Dee would sign his name as 007. I kid you not. I kid you not. He'd sign his name as 007. He also had a guy called Kelly with him, and he would scry. Do you know what scrying is? You heard of the term scry? Come on, there's not many witchy women around here. They're normally using my talks. Yeah, you got them, scry. To look into a crystal ball and see things. Only they didn't use a crystal ball. They used a black ball called obsidian, which is a volcanic rock that's polished. So that gives you a clue where they're going. And they wanted to summon up lower vibrational entities because the lower vibrational entities could cut a deal with them and give them more power to dominate and control. Might need a few sacrifices to go in there, a bit of lower vibrational fear, all that kind of stuff as well, because that's what these lower vibrational entities feed on, is that kind of stuff. Feed fear and terror and all the rest of it to get souls. Okay, so that's where that comes from. He scried a whole language called Enochian, which is quite a clever thing to do, actually. You can't invent a whole language like that, so that was all scried. So it's all very dark magic, and these guys, they know how the universe works. They know if they do bad things, or if they do evil, it's going to come back on them. So they got to trick you to do the evil for them. And it comes back on you. So how are they going to trick you to do that? Well, they have to start casting spells, don't they? And they use your operating software in order to do that. And one of the ones they'll start off with goes all the way back to Francis Bacon, this thing called a name. In England at that time, nobody said yes or no. They said yay or nay. They still do in the House of Lords now, which used to be the highest court in the country, was the House of Lords. But now we've got the more the Bar Association things in there. So we've kind of lost that because it's all gone legal, because we've moved away from law. We've chosen to move away from law. Why have we chosen to move away from law? You signed yourself away from that. Because basically, your name is nay me. It's not you. So when you consent to be your nay me, and your surety name, your surname, your surety name, you've consented to be a fiction. Part of the fictional reality, the mass kind of externalized consciousness that's the product of these psychopaths, these narcissists, who thrive on creating lower vibrational reactions so that these lower vibrational entities can come in and cause the havoc they've done. Because these narcissists that have been created, they can be possessed. They're the last people that I think they'll be possessed, but basically they're a vehicle with an authentic self that's shut down, okay, that couldn't really manage things. So a lower vibrational entity comes in, just like the ones they were summoning up from Dr. John Dee, getting those in. We will need more power, we need more power. So they say, don't worry, we'll take care of it. So it's just like a vehicle with the keys left in it. They put the authentic self in the boot, lock it in the boot, and let's take it for a drive. That's what they do. And you make it look good and all the rest of it, but, you could call that possession. But there's this fake personality that's there, and any of you that's been in a relationship with a narcissist will see sometimes it's not them that's there anymore, that something else has come in. Yeah? Or you can see it now. We've got YouTube videos now where they wheel on these politicians and they start talking, and then suddenly, and the security around them are laughing and sniggering. Why? Because there's no one home. There's nothing there. The thing is left. Because it's fake. Just because you can look at it in this 3-4 dimensional reality doesn't mean to say that it's got its authentic consciousness. It's inside it that's driving it. It could be a whole bunch of other things. Just think of some of the politicians you've seen. Our Prime Minister, for example. These guys, you think, well, are they ever going to be satisfied with the money that they've got? Of course they're not. Because they're not there. They're not they haven't got any empathy, clearly, none at all. But they become the foot soldiers, and this is where it's going to get really, and I said I'm not going to pull any punches. This is how you take over the whole world. You take over what's supposed to be the dominant species by traumatizing them, by creating systems of governance like business. And business is a great word. There's a little word in the middle of business. Sierra, India, November. sin. Sin, the meaning of sin, means to miss the target. You've missed the objective. The objective being what you are here and incarnated here to accomplish. You've got sidetracked into doing something else. It makes sense in your head, in the operating software there, but your heart may not be going in with it. Your heart may not be in it. I mean, if you could earn a living doing something that, you know, your heart's happy with, then that's as good as it gets. But most people, they have to do something they don't like doing. And they've sold their life out. And what they've done is they've created a financial system that's based on your slavery, based on you not being you and standing surety for a debt-based currency. And they do it really well because what they do is they create a bond. Again, 007 again. James Bond. And so basically the bond basically is when your parents, who are also enslaved, they have a name and it's there on the birth certificate. It exists there. Only it says informant. It doesn't say mother. Sometimes it says mother, but mostly it's informant. And they create a bond. There's actually 2 birth certificates, and one of these bonds is worth millions because it's the value of your life. I mean, gold, silver, yeah, that's worth something, but how much is your life worth? It's priceless, isn't it? How much is the life of a slave worth? This is where we go back to the legal thing from, where that originally comes from. We're going back to Rome. And this plebiscite, which is where you get republic from. It means the commoners, someone that's the slave, the lower people. And again, they tried the same gig with the Magna Carta. Because in Magna Carta, to have any truck with that, you've got to be a baron. Baron, French for free man. If you're not a baron, it doesn't apply to you. You're one of those peasants that kind of rebelled in 1311 and did quite a lot of damage, really, in terms of how the establishment was. And they knew they couldn't beat it militarily. That's why they had to come up with tweaking the software, which is what they got together a little bit later with Francis Bacon. And then when they'd introduced all those words, you then come into this time where we have the Charles I, who lost his head. I mean, he had his faults and everything, but he didn't want anybody issuing anything other than real money. Touch it, feel it, measure the length, breadth, width of it. Because for 300 years previous to that, there was no inflation. Because no one was lending any money apart from the aristocracy and that, and they kept that amongst themselves. So a loaf of bread cost the same as it did 300 years ago. Unthinkable now, isn't it? I mean, I can remember when I was a kid, a Mars bar used to cost 4p. That's 4D. God knows what it costs now. Or there were, when I was a kid, like there were cigarette machines in the streets. You could buy them for 2 bob or 2 and 6, half a crown. 20 fags, 20 senior service. 20 fags now are like, what, 12, 15 pounds? If you still smoke, which I don't, thank God. Look at that inflation. How has that been caused? It's been caused by a fake form of money. A form of money that's able to harvest you. You're always being harvested. Your life energy, the time of your life is being harvested. The quality of your consciousness is being harvested. Your hopes, your dreams, your ability to love, your heart, all of that is being harvested by this system. They want you to miss the target on what you incarnated in this world to do. There are happy mediums, yeah, and we're in this time, this place, and this space to do stuff, but what I'm trying to do is remove the veil so you can then maybe look at yourself and look at your own situation and say, well, is that true? Maybe I can change that. Maybe I can do something about that. Because it is an inside job. Like the previous speaker said, don't follow any leaders. That's how we got in this mess. following the narcissists, following the psychopaths, going to war, doing the most horrendous things to each other, and having to, inherit the karma for generations and generations for our children and all the rest of it. And it's all the same deal, spinning around and spinning around. It's this lack of empathy, this quality of consciousness that has no empathy. Lower vibrational quality of consciousness that has no empathy. The worst, most dangerous aspect of this is it's externalized it. Because artificial intelligence, it has no empathy, does it? Nobody, as far as I know, is going, wow, I've actually written the software that's an empathy program. It must be the most complex thing to write, ever. They don't have it. So they need you to react to artificial intelligence, because it's got no empathy. It's not going to give you any consideration. When you go to the checkout things, you can't ask it a question. It either is or it isn't. You're either going to get your food or you're not. And that's the way it's going to be. And slowly, 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 they've kind of put this quality of consciousness, and you've handed over your power to this unempathic group of narcissists. You are being narcissistically abused. And I can tell you, if you look at the whole COVID thing, and you just looked at that as being in a relationship with a narcissist, the whole gaslighting trip, which is where that phrase comes from, is being done, and it's still being done now. It's all about gaslighting. It's all about keeping you in trauma, because when you're in trauma, you can't be that child. You can't connect because you're in fight, flight, or fawn. Now, you've probably heard of fight or flight, but have you heard fawn? Do you know what fawn means? Some of you must. Fawn means that you do some little jiggly dance to kind of hope to appease your oppressor, so they'll keep you okay, you'll be all right for a while, you'll keep your job, you'll be able to do it, but sod the other guys. It's like the crocodile's going to eat all of us, but you're just going, okay, well, I'll be last. And of course the whole thing is about empathy. We all go, or none of us goes. All the way back to that Stone Age woman with the broken hip. It was like, okay, we'll stay with you. That's empathy. We'll stay with you, we'll give you the shelter, we'll look after you. And when you're well, we'll go together. That's empathy. That's what we need. That's who we are. That's who we really are, with empathy. And unfortunately, those people that have been so severely traumatized in an infantile state of mind, they've, acquired narcissistic personality disorder. Basically, there is a very young child, authentic self, that's locked down there, it's locked inside. And it feels really crap about itself because it's been abandoned because, its mother didn't love it. It's got that very simplistic way of looking at things. And when you're in a relationship with somebody with that mental health disorder, which is what it is, it's a mental health disorder, we can actually solve this problem really quickly with the same kind of laws they came out with in COVID. Very simply, absolutely simply. It's just unbelievable. What you can do is you can do a test. It's called a PET scan. You can say, okay, things are getting really bad now. What would do anybody with, say, over 2 million quid in the bank account, anybody that's in a situation of authority, like a cop, or a doctor, or a scientist, or a banker, we'll just give them a PET scan. And there's an area of the brain, you don't even need to do the DNA thing. There's an area in the brain that should show loads of activity if you're an empath. Because if you're an empath, you're thinking about other people all the time, especially if you're a mother or something like that. So there's lots of activity going in there. But to the narcissist, the sociopath and the psychopath, nothing. Absolutely nothing. And that's a mental health disorder. So a lot of these people you can identify without having to run, because they're brilliant at deception. Absolutely brilliant at deception. Because the way they work, they data mine. Right? Just check this outside, in the outside reality. On a one-to-one, a narcissist will data mine. They'll love bomb you, so you tell them everything about yourself, And then all the information they get, they'll flip the polarity on it. So if you're a guy, the woman will go, oh, I'm really interested, oh, I love you, da 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 da, and then flip that back, and it'll be a mirror version of you, because that's all they can do, is mirror. And you'll think, oh, we've got so much in common. I found my soulmate at last. But you haven't. It's a mirror. The person you've actually fallen in love with is a mirrored feminine version of you, or the other way around, a masculine version of you. That's fake. It's an illusion. And when they've got you there, then it's harvest time. And you'll always be trying to go back to the way it was before, and they'll just feed you enough of that possibility to keep you there while they harvest you. And then when they find someone else, you get the discard, and they'll take you for everything you got. Just like every government has done. Just like every bank has done. If you want to look what a narcissist is, just look at the whole thing behind usury. Even the Roman Church had it nailed down. The charging of interest. Charles I loses his head because he wanted to keep money. So then they get a foreign couple in that didn't even speak English. I mean, we've had so many monarchs that can't speak English, blimey. And then they install the, we had, what's his name, Cromwell. Cromwell was employed by what I term as the International Usury Cartel, which was based in Amsterdam. That's after they got chucked out of Spain. And they financed him. And we lived in a republic under Cromwell for a while. They got his statue out there and all the rest of it. And then we came back to a monarchy. And at the same time, we were introducing the legal system. They had to come up with things called dictionaries. So they came up with all these dictionaries to list all those words now, because people were getting more authentic. Why? Well, because those lower vibrational entities that Dr. John Dee was talking about said, listen, you guys want to take over this world? You're going to have to get technology together. You're going to have to really get it together. You're going to have to list this whole thing. You've got to get the operating software of these monkeys sorted out. You've got to target their empathy so they don't ask questions, they don't put themselves, am I doing my job? All right? And earning money. I've got more than you. You know, look at me, look at my house, look at all this stuff. All the empathy's gone. All that stuff. Industrial revolution. Industrial revolution, man. God blimey. What happened is the aristocracy got into debt with the International Usury Cartel, so-called Bank of England, which has got nothing to do with England. And they conned the royal family in there because they betrayed their oath. They committed treason because they became a shareholder. But there's a law that's basically you're never, ever, ever allowed to see who the shareholders are, the Bank of England or any centralised bank. Game would be up, guys, with that information. And so basically the aristocracy got into debt because they're lending money they don't have. They lent so much money they didn't have, so people got into debt. So what do they do then? Well, they got real assets. They got your farm, they got your business, all that stuff. And the aristocracy went, well, all we've got is I know what, let's come up with some enclosures acts. And we'll take the common land off the people. So they came up, because they were the only ones in Parliament, they came up to pay the debts, they put fences around the common land so the common people couldn't feed themselves anymore. Which was a good idea because they need to be driven off the land and into the cities for the next stage of the development called the Industrial Revolution. Come on, guys, let's get it. Come on. Competing against each other, living on top of each other, all the other stuff. Breeding like mice, running around on those wheels, all that stuff, doing it, all that, learning, all that kind of stuff, writing it all down. Dickens is writing about how bad it is. And people in charge with all the money, they have no empathy, so they're not listening. They're not going to do anything. Then you have a few world wars. I mean, we had a thing called the Bills of Exchange Act. That's when they really wanted to take the first weighted metal out, even though they had all the debt in there. And they had to create an interesting line in the Bills of Exchange Act, which translated out of legalese, basically means payment offered and payment refused is payment made. Okay, so in the Victorian times, I wanted to go and buy myself a newfangled bicycle. I'd go in there, well, that'll be 2 guineas, sir. And so I'm the guy that's selling the bike, and the guy gives me these bits of paper. What's that? I'm not taking that. But under the Bills of Exchange Act, if you don't take that, then the bike's mine. Payment offered in a legal tender and refused is payment made. Why? Because you've put me in dishonour, and hey, that's got a picture of the monarch on it. That's treason. And so people thought, oh well, I better take that money, because I can take that money, and you could then and go to the bank and still get your weighted metal in exchange for it, because it was a promissory note that would do that. And so gradually they kind of phased that in. And then they phase in, like the First World War happened, and the monstrous debt that goes into that. And then of course they had the big crash, a 1929 crash, which is when they really started registering the births and all that malarkey. And they basically, what they were supposed to do was to say, okay, in order to carry business and stuff on, every birth gets registered, and that you have a bond account, so everything you need in your life is paid for. And most of you are thinking, well, how can that be so? Well, let's go all the way back. Grantor of dominion. Biblically, you were granted dominion here. You were granted everything you need from your first breath to your last. It's your right. It was given to you free. Absolutely free. You just had to put a bit of work in to make that stuff and get it all together. That's it. It's already yours. And therefore, everything that you had, say, let's just say, for example, what is it, 4.5 billion people, 8 billion people now? Whoever tells us those figures, I don't know, the WEF thing or whatever it is. If you divided each individual down, you say, oh, I had a mate of mine in Southampton University actually worked this out, but this is when it was about 7.5 billion people. He said, I've worked it out, Al. I said, really? You've worked out how much each individual gets? He goes, yeah, it works out you get about 6 rugby football fields. That's the land that's yours, and the mineral rights on it. I thought, well, that's pretty good, because a family of 4, that's a big farm, isn't it? You can sustain yourself on that. Cool. But of course, when your birth is registered, register means you're giving away whatever you're registering to who you're ever registering it with. And that was also given away and monetized and put into this bond account, which is worth millions, but they didn't tell you that. And the way they got round that is they got you to declare that you're a mental health outpatient and you can't manage your own affairs, so they'll appoint someone to manage that account for you. You've all done it. You've consented to be the name. All the property you've got is in the name and the surname. The namee. It's not you. It's not yours. It's the fiction's. It's owned by the fiction. And the surname, the surety name, is standing surety. So every asset you've got, when the banks go down, they can say, you're standing surety. Is this your name? Your surname? Yeah, that's right. Well, that's ours. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. That's how they're going to do it. That's how they've already done it. I'm just trying to pull the veil away so you can see how it kind of works and what options you've got. And you say, well, I want to get out of the system. How can I get out of the system? Sorry, you're in it. If you want to get out of the system, then the only link you've got to that property, are you going to sever that? Or we can put it in a trust or something. You try getting a trust together. Some of the most complex things, they don't want it. So only like the aristocrats and the real wealthy people have it. They create the trusts and the foundations. You won't be able to begin to afford what it is, and have you got the assets to cover it anyway? Because you're not part of the club. To be part of the club, how do you know you're part of the club? Well, you can go to one of these rituals and you can watch a child get sacrificed and not blink an eye. They'll ask you to do it. You can do it. Welcome aboard, you're one of the club. Because we know you ain't got any empathy. You're one of us. But if you turn around and say, no, I can't possibly do that, then you don't join. You ain't a member. And they're really good at acting as though they care. You know, all the time. They're really good at doing that, just like the narcissist. I really love you. I really value our relationship. It's really good. It's really good, you know. Yabby, 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 all the stuff. Phoning you up, massive long phone calls, all the other stuff. Find someone else, discard, boff, gone. Dude. That's all we get on the phone. Over. And that's all these guys are ever going to do. Because government has been created by this same pathology, this same group of mental health disorders, this cluster B pathology. Bureaucracy, that's a complete external manifestation of narcissistic personality disorder. Bouncing you from one place to another place, and ding, 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 and you go, yes, 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 yes. It's a mental health disorder, and it has no empathy. And our only way out of this is with our empathy, because our empathy connects with our authentic self. And our authentic self connects with the grantor of dominion. And believe it or not, your authentic self, those of you, I mean, I say I'm a bard musician, if you want to really connect, and this is what the old guys did, they were able to connect to that's all around us, that Mandela, if you like, a super computer, a quantum computer. If you're doing something with passion, you're doing something with love, and you have a problem, you'll put it out to the universe, and the solution will manifest in front of you. It doesn't matter what that problem is. It will manifest, but it's an inside job to do it. You've been programmed to look for the solution outside of yourself. Oh, and if you get more of this currency, well, then you can buy it. And therefore they control it, and they control it all, and they control you and all the rest of it. You know, it's like these people, you know, I used to teach music, all right? And the thing is, it's like teaching English. You can't really teach music. You wouldn't teach somebody to read and write before they could talk. What would be the point of that? Because they wouldn't know what the words mean or what they look like. It's the same way with music. It's pointless just teaching somebody the dots and the squiggles and the lines on the paper until they know what they sound like. And in order for them to sound right, to animate them, the gig of being a musician is just a sound pressure wave. It's noise. It's like this voice coming to you now. It's just sound pressure waves that are just vibrating these little membranes in your ear, and your brain's articulating it. But there's something else that's going on there. Hopefully, because I'm speaking from the heart, I'm hanging some emotional content onto that, and we're all connecting together like that. This is why I'm speaking the way I'm doing. I'm doing a virtuoso, and I'm speaking from the heart, because part of you wants to hear this, and there's a feedback going on there. Just in the same way as if I'm, you know, with a bunch of jazz musicians, and we're virtuosoing with each other. We're connecting with each other. And we can go off in one way or another way, it doesn't matter. It's like a martial art. Again, it's moving meditation. It's like we're in touch with ourselves, we're in the groove. The groove is holy, it's the holy groove. It's in time. If you've got to count time, you're not in time. You're not in the groove. And so that's the gig of the bard, is to be in the groove, is to play in time, is to be able to go with the flow. And that's the way you're supposed to go in life. I think I've talked too much now, haven't I?
Well, no, I mean, it's time wise.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.